Okay, so today I'm going to cover the Dell XPS 13 and the Dell XPS 13 2-in-1. And no, this is not going to be a comparison, more like a second look at both of them, especially if you have maybe already seen my top 5 best Ultrabooks at around 13 inches and still can't quite decide between the both of them. I will try to get few things, the main differences, because they have a little bit of a different use case scenario in my opinion, and then maybe that helps you to choose between the two, and they definitely deserve this second look. So let's start off with the first thing, the design and build quality. As you can already see here, the Dell XPS 13 is a little bit taller than the 13 2-in-1. It's also a little bit thicker and about 100 grams heavier. Therefore though, the 2-in-1 has the 360-degree hinge, which I like a lot because this one actually makes it quite easily to be used as a tablet, and I actually did this. It also comes along with pen support, which is something that you don't get on the 13, which by the way is the QHD Plus version that also has a touchscreen. Otherwise, what do we have in terms of ports? Because here we actually have some differences, and I want to quickly go into a few of them. Now, as you can see in terms of ports, the 13 has the old style connector for the charging, USB Type-C, both actually have Thunderbolt. Here we have USB Type-A, the headphone jack, and the button for the statuses. Now on the 13 2-in-1 we only have the Thunderbolt along with the headphone jack and the status LEDs. Both have a very kind of similar speaker arrangement. Both are a little bit angled but still quite hard to be opened, and especially with one hand it's pretty much not even possible. On the other side, both have the speakers once again here, but on the one side here on the 13 we have a full-size SD card reader and once again USB Type-A, which makes it definitely a way more capable device in terms of ports. So the port selection is way better here. And on the 13 2-in-1 we have the power button along with a micro SD card reader, only that unfortunately, and USB Type-C this time for DisplayPort, so you will only be able to charge on the left side. But as you can see, you have way more flexibility in terms of ports on the 13 compared to the 13 2-in-1. The 13 2-in-1 is just supposed to be a little bit more portable, I would say, also a little bit more flexible in terms of the 360-degree hinge, and also because of the pen support. Now if we open them up, like I said, it's quite hard to do on both. Very stiff hinges, which is good for touchscreen use because they don't really wobble around. But yeah, I'm just not the biggest fan of that because I know that other laptops can actually do it. As you can already see on its at some angle, of course the 13 will flip over a little bit, but this is usually an angle that you should not think even about because it's definitely way more than enough. And here you can maybe even see this a little bit more, how much thicker, and I know it's hard to see how much thicker at the bottom especially the 13 is, just because it has that Type-A port, which I would have really loved to see, and which is a big omission on the 13 2-in-1. But I guess if you want to keep it slim, there is just no other option. Now in terms of the keyboard, I would actually say there is no real difference, because I'm still not the biggest fan of either one, because they still to me feel a little bit dead. And I know this is a little bit hard to describe, but the travel isn't bad, but it kind of dampens out so abruptly, and that's why it's just not the best typing experience. The layout is okay. I'm not the biggest fan of the layout of the 13 2-in-1 though, because you don't have a dedicated button to change the brightness. You will have to do this with the function button. As you can see here, way less. So this is a little bit more functional. So if I would still give one keyboard a little bit of the upper hand, it would be this one after all, because the better layout of the buttons. Also, you can see here, this looks a little bit more cramped. So yeah. But just in terms of typing experience and so on, backlight, it's pretty much the same. Trackpad is absolutely the same. I don't see a real difference here at all. Like I said, both have a touch screen, but only this one has the type pen support. But as you can also see, I mean, the 13 2-in-1 has a fingerprint reader, which at least this version doesn't have. I'm not quite sure if there is one with, so don't get me on that. Now, in terms of the displays, this is the Quad HD Plus version with 3200 by 1800, where this is just the 1080p version. There is also a 4K version, but I would just forget that, because in terms of performance and battery life, I think it will suffer too much. And this display actually is already super nice, because if you check my Spider benchmarks, and I'm quite sure you can see the values, but 98% on both of them as RGB and 77 for Adobe RGB. But as you can maybe already see a little bit, the calibration out of the box is not the same, because if we go into the next thing, the gamma is a little bit different, where we have 2.1 here, it is 2.3 here, so both are a little bit off from the ideal 2.2. It is the temperature. As you can see, the color temperature, here we are at 6600, which is pretty much ideal. 6500 would have been what everyone wants to, but here we are at 7900, and this display definitely is out of the box noticeably too cold. The 13 though has the upper hand in terms of brightness, because it reaches 490, where this one only reaches like 495, but believe me, anything above 300 is, or I mean 350 is way more than bright enough. So this is absolutely top. This is just better. In terms of the black values, as you can see here, we have the highest one on the maximum brightness of 0.56, and here we have 0.36, but where they are a little bit closer at around 250 or so, I would say they are quite similar. It seems, at least on paper, if I check it with my spider, that the 13-2-in-1 has the better black values. I guess this is due to the high resolution, where here you just don't have the best blacks, since you just have to go with the light through more pixels. In terms of contrast, it's also better, and I would actually say that this is a beautiful display, but I would prefer the 1080p display, and the reason therefore is actually quite easy to say. Why? Because it is just a little bit easier on the eyes in terms of scaling, so I just have to give it to that. Now, if we quickly go on the same page here, I can also already go into the next thing, which would be the sound. And I'm just gonna show one off because the sound is pretty much absolutely identical. Okay, just real quick, what we have on both of them is Dell's audio software. It takes a few seconds longer to load, as you can see here, where you have adjustments for bass, details, and also width. And it definitely helps. You should maybe change it a little bit up, but I have to say that back when I reviewed the 13-2-in-1 for the first time, it was actually one of the best Ultrabook speakers out there, because it sounds quite full. Doesn't, and that's something that's really nice to see, not distort anymore. It gets loud enough, and the sound overall is very nice. But I have to say, by now we have better ones. Something like the MateBook X sounds better from Huawei. Something like the Surface Laptop sounds better, and also an Spectre X360. But these, even though are weaker, still do a totally fine job, and I have no complaints about them. Now, what about the performance? Here you will maybe actually already see a difference, because as you can see here, just pushing 1080p just makes a nice experience. As you can see, everything is smooth and buttery, everything is just so nice. And due to the high resolution, it's not maybe always that smooth, but I have to say, compared to previous models, now this time is actually fully satisfying. I would still prefer this one a little bit, because it just feels a little bit more lightweight in Chrome. And this one just not quite as smooth, but definitely that won't make the difference. If you want a little bit more, then you will get it. Now, in terms of SSD speeds, difference here is actually not that bad, because as you can see, about 1700 in terms of read speeds and 417 in terms of write speeds. We have about 15, like almost 16 and 450. So quite similar, but the boot time on both is still a little bit too long for me. I'm not quite sure what it is. I think like 12 seconds or so, which is a little bit too long considering the fast SSD. Now, what I have to cover though still, even though the 13-2-in-1 only has a Y CPU, you won't really notice anything of that. And I've seen people saying that I would not consider that one, the 13-2-in-1, the 2-in-1, because it just has the weaker Y CPU. But believe me, in normal use, you won't ever notice, unless you maybe render videos all the time and do some heavy photo editing. You won't notice, because yes, the U CPU is a little bit better. It is also fan cooled, therefore a little bit louder, which is the big benefit on my side from the 2-in-1, because noiseless. Both have a little bit of some coil whine, which I'm not the biggest fan of, so sometimes you will actually be able to hear it. It's not a deal breaker, but it's at least something to point out that I've heard people actually returning them because their coil whine was so bad. On mine, it's acceptable, but Dell still has a little bit of an issue with this coil whine in general. But if I would have to give it to the performance, yes, it will get it. I will give it to the 13. But I would still choose the Y, because it's way more than enough for what I ever do with that. I don't need it for heavy tasks, because then I would just get something with a quad core. And so I'm saying this in every review. For what they are intended to do, the Y CPU is more than good enough. But the next things, the emissions, when we talk about noise and heat, in terms of noise, the upper hand definitely goes to the 13-2-in-1, because as you can see here, it just doesn't have a fan. There is nothing, and it just doesn't need it. Yes, it gets a little bit warmer on the bottom if you maybe use it on your lap, but it doesn't really get uncomfortably warm, especially not in normal use, because it just doesn't heat up, and it's just pretty much completely quiet besides, like I said, the minimal coil whine. But the 13 2-in-1, and I've complained this a little bit more about in older generations, actually makes the fans kick in a little bit more often than they would need to. Not the case anymore, since Kaby Lake is so efficient. This device, since it is actively cooled, actually only barely ever turns on the fans, and if, of course, then you will hear them. It's maybe not the very best sound. It sounds a little bit like not all that high quality, something like, for example, Surface Laptop manages to have a little bit more of a subtle noise, and also some of the ThinkPad series, but it totally gets the job done. It's never really annoying, and in most cases it won't ever even turn on. Now, heat, of course, the upper hand goes to the 13, just because it is air cooled. It can dissipate the heat a little bit better, but it's not an issue for the other one. Now, in terms of battery life, I'm not 100% sure, because I just didn't get enough time to properly check the battery on the 13. But from what I saw for a few days, what I used it over the course of about 2 or 3 weeks, I would actually expect to get about 8 hours of screen on time, where I would closer be at around 10 on the 13 2-in-1 if nothing has changed from the last time that I've used it. So I didn't make any more in-depth testing on that battery life, but it was, I would say, at least a little bit better, because after all, the battery is smaller. We only are pushing 1080p and the a little bit less, say, efficient SoC or CPU. So the 13, definitely easily more than good enough, but the 13 2-in-1 just makes this better. But one thing that I have to mention is actually CABC, Content Adaptive Brightness Control, which is something that I hate, and whoever the guy is who invented that should be stripped off of all his rights, because especially on the 13 2-in-1 it is unacceptable, because you have, if you change the contrast from something bright to something dark, such an extreme harsh change of brightness, and I can't show this because I've turned it on of both, which is relieving, because there is a patch. You have to search for it a little bit, but for both of them, because it's quite annoying on both. Not quite so much on the 13 as on the 13 2-in-1, but it's unacceptable on both. Yes, you might lose out on a little bit on battery life. People say about like 20%. Honestly, I don't care. I would even maybe sacrifice like 30% of battery life, since it's still good enough for both, but not Content Adaptive Brightness Control. I don't want to change my brightness, and especially not by the content. No. In terms of software, pretty much the same. So, what's the use case scenario for the 13? I would say this is an old school laptop. It's just super lightweight. We don't have big bezels. Of course, both have the camera down there, which kind of records your nose hairs, but it is still light. It's not quite as light as, for example, something like a MateBook X anymore, but it still is totally lightweight enough. Even though I've seen people saying that this is by now too heavy and too bulky to be used. Same also for this one. I kinda have a hard time getting this, because at around 1.2, 1.3 kilograms, this is great still, because they are very compact. They are built so solid, because if we quickly go into that, this is just not doing anything. There is no flex, no nothing. Both rubberized feet, this time on the bottom, these long ones, black and for some reason gray on the 13 2-in-1. The build quality is absolutely top notch. And like I said, the 13 is a little bit heavier, but it gives you a little bit more performance. It gives you a little bit more power. It gives you, just a little bit more of that on especially ports, if you need those. So this is more of something that you can use portable, but at home a little bit easier with some more peripherals and so on. But I have to just give it to that, and that's why the 13 2-in-1 is kind of still my personal favorite. First of all, I have the option to use it as a tablet, even though I wouldn't actually use it like this. What I would use it is on my lap and then like this and use it, because it's super handy. I guess at some point I would actually maybe even buy the Active Pen that I didn't have in for review, but I've already used it and I think it works quite great. And overall, I have to say, you could actually, if the camera is an issue for you, with this one, just turn it around, and then the camera is upside, as you can see here. So this would actually be a solution for the camera. Actually, this one seems to have real sense. Yeah, not that I have really tried the camera anywhere, but this is just more flexible if you want to use it in portable use more a little bit. Of course, you will need something like, for example, a USB Type-C adapter. This one then would give you way more than enough ports. And why I actually don't have such an issue with the lack of an USB Type-A port is the following. If you want to use it anywhere where you are, you don't really will want to plug in anyways a lot of stuff. Okay, something like an USB Type-A would have been nice for a mouse or so, but if you just use, for example, a Bluetooth mouse, a touchscreen or a trackpad, you will be fine. But if I am at home and I would kind of wanna like to use this as a desktop replacement, then I would want more than just 2 USB ports sometimes, or maybe what we have, and then I would just have to plug in everything that I want. For example, my second monitor, as we can also see here, we have SD card and micro SD card, we have Ethernet, we have USB Type-C. This though on this one is not for charging, and we have 3 USB Type-A ports. So you could plug up pretty much everything that you need for a desktop replacement, plug in, and then you are good to go. Of course, you can do the same on the 13 as well, but this just shows you that you don't particularly need it anymore. And this, by the way, if you're interested, is for example the Quack, I don't really know, USB Type-C adapter that I got in for review. It definitely does a nice job. It accepts everything very well, and I would say that we are going into a future where USB Type-A will get away at some point, but I don't think anytime soon. So I still prefer a Type-A, but actually for what I do with laptops, I would be fine with just USB Type-Cs and maybe an adapter, because I usually don't plug in much. So like I said, this is my favorite because it's a little bit more portable, a little bit more flexible in terms of usability, and the display is great, the battery life is even better, performance is easily good enough, so what else do you want more? Not saying that I can't recommend the 1321, especially if you are just looking for a old school clamshell laptop as good as it pretty much gets, then this one is the one to go for. But now again, I could link you to my top 5 comparison of other Ultrabooks with the MateBook X that is even lighter than both of these, has the better speakers and so on, better screen, at least in some aspects. Surface laptop maybe, or an Spectre X360. Yeah. That would be good enough. Otherwise, maybe a thumbs up, maybe a subscription. But definitely, I would like to have a comment on what you think of both of them, which one you prefer, and maybe what you think about the Y CPU, because I think you really need to use it once to actually properly be able to judge it, which most people just judge by not even knowing it. But yeah, until next time, bye.